Cosmo.
I'm Wanda.
And we're... your fairy godparents!
These videos are not for children. If you are a children, then piss off.
Hey there, I'm Infuso, and growing up, I spent a lot of my time sitting in front of a TV screen. Luckily, I'm way past that phase, and now as an adult, I spend most of my time staring at a computer screen. See, now that's what you call progress. But when I was a child, a lot of that time spent sitting in front of the TV was spent watching Nickelodeon, as you may have guessed from my previous SpongeBob video. And when I wasn't watching SpongeBob SquarePants, I was usually watching Fairly Oddparents. You know, that show about a neglected child whose only real escape from his less-than-stellar life is his two magical fairies who grant his every wish? It's a strange premise, but I assure you it works in execution. Or, well, you know, at least it did. At first. But like many shows, at some point in time, it seemed to go all downhill. And today we're here to talk about a couple contributing factors.
Magic little fish should grant his every wish, 'cause in reality, they are his Oddparents, fairly Oddparents.
Swans and Loading Crown Evening.
Like many shows I cover on this channel, usually with the passing of time, for one reason or another, three-dimensional characters seem to be filed down to just a few minor quirks or traits. And the Fairly Oddparents is no exception. Timmy's parents, who were already oblivious and neglectful, age like fine milk steak.
What? Milk steak.
They become more oafish with each passing season, and they go from being obnoxiously unaware to being intentionally absent. In newer episodes, it genuinely seems like they don't like their son. Whereas Fairly Odd Parent Cosmo is very much the Patrick Star of this show, as he started off comedically dim, only to later on become intolerably and unreasonably stupid, which I believe also might be a direct quote to me from one of my exes. Fairly Odd Parent Wanda in later seasons dives into the nagging wife trope, which I guess she always kind of represented to begin with, but she was shown to be thoughtful and caring. She was a mostly morally competent person, thing. And her nagging was actually just her being the voice of reason, trying to talk Cosmo and Timmy out of their stupid schemes. But now, she just nags to nag. That's her character. What's even worse is that she was depicted as being the most intelligent out of the show's main cast. But now, somehow her stupidity almost rivals Cosmo's. She's now equally idiotic. And while she still has her shrill voice, there's not too much reason coming out of it anymore. Timmy Turner, being that he's, like, 10, is immature, and at times downright selfish, but he's still also acted entirely selfless in the past. And even though, yeah, he has some growing to do, probably in more ways than one, he's a sweet kid. Or at least he was, because later episodes kinda deprive him of any humility. And they also made him a whole lot more dumb. You know what, actually, come to think of it, everyone on the show becomes stupid. Like literally everyone. They all just eventually become written to play the dummy. And I'll be honest, it can sometimes lead to some comical moments on the show, but it makes any character in any given situation interchangeable, and therefore unimportant. They're just kind of writing humor now and dividing it up between a whole universe full of characters. A universe full of characters who all think and act alike. There's no longer individual uniqueness to any of the cast. But you know, then again, to be fair, I am a 28-year-old man talking about a children's show, so, you know, maybe I'm just looking too deep into this. But my major point here is that you can write any character out and replace them with another. And it would make it no different. If the creative decrease in the characters from the original ensemble wasn't bad enough, and it is, the show also makes the grave mistake of adding terrible new, unnecessary characters to its lore. First, there's the inclusion of baby Poof, the son of Cosmo and Wanda, and the new godbrother of Timmy. Being a baby, Poof adds absolutely nothing to any conversation other than his own name, thus making him the worst Pokemon ever conceived.
He's only saying his name! That's all he ever says!
His inclusion adds nothing to the series at all. He didn't have a fully formed personality just yet. He could hardly contribute to plots. Poof, for the most part, was just a background accessory.
If you cut the letter F from Poof, you have my exact opinion of Baby Poof in the Fairly Oddparents.
I don't think we have to go there at all.
I mean, to his credit, he didn't necessarily take anything away from the series in general, but he was just there, and I don't think he needed to be. The best thing I can attribute to Poof is that him being there led to the creation of his anti-fairy, Foop. And he was pretty funny. He had his moments. So overall, not the worst addition to the show, but still completely unnecessary. But not the worst. And you're gonna see why in just a moment. He was so easy to look past that he actually disappeared for the majority of a season, and no one seemed to notice. And if they did, they kept quiet because they did not care. In Season 9, the show introduced us to yet another very odd character. That being Timmy's new fairy god dog, Sparky. Sparky was a hyperactive, dim-witted dog with wings. The dog means well, but he's kinda just a screw-up. So, as you can imagine, I relate heavily to this dog on a spiritual level. In the sense that everyone in the audience hopes that they could just write me off. And what's sad is I don't even need to make jokes for this one. The Simpsons already did it for me!
Simpsons did it! Simpsons did it!
This is literally exactly what they were talking about to a T. The issue here is that like Poof, he served no purpose. However, unlike Poof, he did wind up taking away from the show, as the character in general is a bit of an attention hog, and the spotlight often would have to go back onto him. Meanwhile, he's just Cosmo as a dog. That's it, that's the character. Dog Cosmo. You could've just turned Cosmo into... It's the same shit! Not to mention, as previously stated, everyone on the show had already become relentlessly stupid. So adding another one was just pointless. Ultimately, the show realized their mistake as the following season, Sparky was dropped with little to no explanation. And hey, I don't know how you put down a magical dog, but I'm grateful they figured it out. And there's Kevin Crocker, Mr. Crocker's nephew, who's pretty much nothing short of a mini-me of his uncle, except that from time to time he does try to do the right thing. That's it. That's the whole character. And last and least was Chloe Carmichael, who granted has a nice enough name, could definitely make it as a comic book character, but the character is downright intolerable. The textbook definition of a Mary Sue. She's an overachieving do-gooder who Timmy now has to share his godparents with. The thing is, a character like this could become very tiresome very fast, especially if you're having the character as a lead. On top of her being intolerably squeaky clean, I don't think the show does a good job of justifying why she needs fairy godparents. She's a positive, upbeat, the sun will come out tomorrow type of gal. She inspires hope. She doesn't need to learn any lessons like Timmy did. Why is this? That's actually all I'm gonna say. Why is this? I'm gonna say now I'm aware that these characters were added to the show not on behalf of Butch Hartman himself, but on behalf of Nickelodeon, who asked that new characters be added in an attempt to revitalize the series. But still, that's a mistake. Clearly, that's a mistake. The Fairly Oddparents formula didn't need tampering. It had funny, well-established characters that, in my opinion, still had stories to be told about them. The add-ons weren't worth their creation. They took valuable screen time away from others and gave nothing back. The presence of all these new additional characters led to some of the show's original lineup being used significantly less, with Chester and AJ disappearing completely. Getting rid of old, tried-and-true characters in favor of newer, unestablished, untested ones is never a bright idea. I mean, need I remind you of Randy from That 70s Show? Because I'm gonna. Your Honor, the prosecution rests. There was a number of great Fairly Oddparents spin-offs to their own show. I know I personally will never forget any of the Jimmy Timmy Power Hours, some of the finest television I have ever seen in my life. There's Abracatastrophe, the School's Out musical, all great examples of the Fairly Oddparents expanding its lore. And then there's the Fairly Oddparents live-action movies. Everything about these movies are insulting to fans of the original series. The whole concept of Timmy Turner being in his mid-20s and still attending the 5th grade, still befriending and hanging out with 5th graders, it's kind of creepy. You turned Timmy Turner into a potential predator. It's weird. It's really, really weird. And what's even worse is that the movies don't even seem to be aware of it. They're completely oblivious to how strange this all is. I mean, it'd be one thing if the joke was, hey, look at this grown man-child trying to fit in with a group of kids and play things off cool. That'd be what... Billy Madison is a good example of that. It's been done before. It could be funny. But no. It's just a plot point that you have to accept. The movies make no jokes in that regard. They don't even call attention to it. We're just supposed to look past it and be like, oh, nothing to see here. Checks out to me. Everything's normal here. But I'll tell you what. It got my attention. And I am a speed dial away from getting Chris Hansen on this case.
What? No way.
It's just so absurd that I can't even fathom how someone could make this and could be entirely unaware of the strange implications behind it. It's a bizarre story. And it'd be weird enough to watch if this was actually done in the cartoon. But seeing this done in real life, like real people, is actually almost terrifying. It's like the first time I watched a Cool Cat video. It's giving me all the wrong vibes.
I'm Cool Cat, and I love all kids!
Timmy's inability to move on with his life does the character a great disservice, as it completely neglects any growth that he's seen in the main series. There's been episodes where it seems like Timmy came to terms with the fact that at some point in time, he needs to move on. I mean, of course he was sad that he'd eventually lose his fairies, but he also seemed almost somewhat at peace with it. He was dedicated to spending his remaining years with them and making them worthwhile. Instead, here, he's paused his entire life to keep his fairies around, which not only is awful for his character, but it also paints Cosmo and especially Wanda in a negative light that they'd go along with this. They don't even just seem to be on board with this plan, at times they seem to be more invested in this than he is.
Magnate's got Tootie! Hooray! Well, I mean...
On top of that, there was already an episode which dove into this kind of premise. Timmy put the world on pause so he could stay 10 for extra long so this way he could keep his fairies for longer. And at the end of the episode, he learned his lesson. So what happened here? If the depiction of Timmy in these movies wasn't bad enough, and again, it clearly is, the casting of Tootie truly misses the mark. Not only does this actress look, sound, and act nothing like the original character, but if they hadn't mentioned the character's name in the movie, there would be absolutely no way whatsoever that the show's original audience would be able to identify her. There is nothing that says this is the same character. And yeah, don't get me wrong, I understand people can change over times, but you know what? Usually, realistically, there's some remaining remnants of what was. And on top of that, we're not talking real life, we're talking about fairies. It does not make sense. Outside of the two leaves, the movies completely relegate Timmy's best friends and main characters, Chester and AJ, down to cameo roles. And not only that, but they strangely enough decide to make them almost antagonists. They berate and put down their friend while flaunting their minor and minuscule real-life achievements in front of his face. Granted, I mean, AJ has done that before. But the thing is, the lessons were learned, and despite an overall immaturity, the series showed that there was love and a genuine friendship underneath those actions. The movie kind of disregards that, and instead of having buddies who sympathize with his plight and his inability to graduate the 5th grade, Chester and AJ actually act jealous of Timmy because he gets to live his life as a 5th grader. Right, yeah, no, that makes sense. Fantastic. Well, perfect. I know that's what I'm thinking in my day-to-day life. Those goddamn 5th graders, they've had it too good for too long. They don't even know how good they have it. So what, do these grown men also want to hang out with a bunch of 12-year-olds? I'm confused, and I don't even know if I want the answers at this point. This is just tone-deaf and terrible. I don't want to see any of these men anywhere near a Chuck E. Cheese ball pit. I'd like to go into more detail about the movies, and not only talk more in depth about their many flaws, but also about some of their more positive attributes. But perhaps that's a video for another time. The show's timeline is all over the goddamn place. There's no real beginning or end to it. The show's continuity pretty much changes from episode to episode. I'm not even gonna hit half of them, but I'll try to belt some out here. At one point in time, it's determined that canonically, Timmy will lose his godparents around 17 or 18. Except in the movies, he's 23, and they're still around because he's never fallen in love. That's apparently important. Timmy initially gets his fairy godparents when he's first babysat by Vicky at age 10. But later on, it's retconned that Timmy was actually dealing with Vicky since age 6, or something like that. Chloe is introduced as an extra godchild? but is nowhere to be seen or mentioned in the movies, which take place after the fact. Cosmo's an only child until years later it's established he has a brother. They also change how and why Mr. Crocker lost his fairies, and they change Cosmo and Wanda's relationship with him. Because in the original episode, which revealed that Crocker had them as fairies, they were very fond of him. They had the same relationship with him as they did with Timmy. But in this retcon, Crocker was selfish and Cosmo and Wanda couldn't stand him. Again, night and day retellings of this story. Wanda can't decide if she's disgusted with or flattered by her ex's infatuation with her. I mean, the list just goes on. There's a lot more. Even outside the various issues with the continuity, it still seemed like there was nothing that was ever set in stone. The episodes would sometimes explore interesting developments, but by the end of the episode, it was always back to the status quo. No matter what happened or what was developed, by the end of everything, things would go back to how they were in the beginning of the episode. Not to mention that there's a bunch of forgotten plots. You remember when Trixie was established as not only a popular pretty girl, but also a bit of a tomboy? Yeah, that's gone. Never again. Do you remember when Trixie was shown to be really attention-driven and in need of constant validation? Yeah, forget about it. Remember when they showed that Veronica actually had feelings for Timmy? Who cares? Nothing ever seems to be permanent on the show. Characters would completely change just to service an episode's particular plotline. And even as a kid, I always found that annoying. But that's just because I'm a continuity hound. This stuff bothered me. This is what keeps me up at night. In life, and especially in entertainment, everything has an expiration date. It's sad, but true. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's much better for history to look back at pieces of media or even careers and say, what if? Rather than actually knowing what if. The Fairly Oddparents had many opportunities to call it quits. They had well-written specials, heartfelt episodes, and TV movies that all could have been seen as a proper end to the series. But instead, to the chagrin of everyone, they went on. Letting a show like this go on for as long as they did stunted character development, and it would see Timmy constantly fluctuate between a boy who learned his lesson to a kid constantly going back on his word. The show ultimately is still a classic, and it will more than likely be remembered for its heyday rather than their downfall. But by the time the show officially came to a close, it was leagues away from its golden years. And listen, I'm not going to act like I'm an animation expert or anything, because I'm definitely not. But the animation toward the end of the show's run seemed really inferior to the show's original style. The way the characters move about reminds me of an old Newgrounds cartoon. The show became very repetitive. It recycled a lot of its plots, except it somehow made them worse. It just progressively disintegrated over time. And worst of all, it continued to give Butch Hartman work. And that may be its greatest cardinal sin. I seen Bunsen as a beast, Butch. Not a fan. Not a fan. In all seriousness, while there was definitely more than just a few contributing factors to its inevitable demise, there is, in my opinion, still a whole lot of reasons to love the show. Or at least its first 6 to 7 seasons. And maybe, if it's any interest to you contributing degenerates, I'll talk about it here. You guys know what to do in the comment section. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.
I'm the Clown Prince of Crime, and that was the Prince of Personality, the Infuso, or so he says. So if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole and you too want to become a V-tard, don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow the man on Twitter, because it's not stalking if it's on the internet after all. Join the fun by joining the Discord. If for some strange reason you want to show support, and I don't know why you would, and if you have $1 to spare, head over to the SIJW's Patreon, where you can request videos, get exclusive content, and early access to scheduled videos. Or head to his PayPal, where you can buy the shirts. Oh, aren't those lovely? And just remember, if you're not tuning in, you're missing out. Yeah.